they get disclosed, that is going to put me in a situation where I will have to withdraw from the case.
Okay.
If any of that is posted anywhere on the internet, we're going to have problems. Whatever copies have been made of that, those need to be destroyed.
Okay.
Okay? If they get disclosed, that is going to put me in a situation where I will have to withdraw from the case.
Okay.
If you disclose that information in any way, all of it needs to be destroyed now. But if you disclose it in any way, it's going to put me in a position where I will have to withdraw from the case. If you all choose to go on the internet and try to publicize this stuff, that's going to create real problems.
Okay.
You can't do it, is what I'm telling you. You cannot do it. I will have to move to withdraw from the case.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
So make sure everybody's aware of that. Okay. If any of that is posted anywhere on the internet, we're going to have problems. Whatever copies have been made of that, those need to be destroyed.
Okay.
Okay. If they get disclosed.
This is not another boring podcast. Mustafa through the police body cams. Defense attorney Brad Haywood, you are under the microscope. In today's podcast, we're going to go into the Brady motion that defense attorney Brad Haywood filed. And we're going to ask the question, why did Brad Haywood, defense attorney Brad Haywood, go behind closed doors, withdraw that he can go in and look at the internal affairs files? Because Brad Haywood filed to get the internal affairs files. Judge Carol Weimer gave him the internal affairs files. He granted him the access to finding out if these investigators in the Mustafa Al-Jazari case is certified to be handling the Mustafa Al-Jazari case. Have they been reprimanded for anything they've done in the Mustafa Al-Jazari case? Brad Haywood was granted access to the internal affairs files. But behind closed doors, he sits down with the prosecutor and he tells the prosecutor, you don't have to give me access to the internal affairs files. The questions that we're asking in this podcast and that what we're going to investigate is, why is there so much pushback to not go through the internal affairs files? During the Brady motion, the prosecutor Sarah Sammy, was terrified. There is so much pushback that she doesn't want anybody to have access to the internal affairs files. What are we going to find out? Prosecutor Sarah Sammy, are we going to find out that your investigators are not certified? Are we going to find out that they falsified this case and they got in trouble for falsifying this case? And having access to the internal affairs files is going to be a problem because you can no longer put those investigators on the stand in front of the jury. As a matter of fact, what we're finding out, that the investigator that you've used in the bond motion and that you're going to be using in a motion that is coming up, Investigator Chad Mason, he testified that he's not licensed to be on this case. We're going to go through what Investigator Chad Mason said in a motion to dismiss and how he told the presiding judge, Judge Carol Weimer, that he's not licensed to testify in this case. But Prosecutor Sarah Sammy have already used him in a bond motion, and she told the Judge Carol Weimer, that her investigator, Chad Mason, is certified. So, if he is certified, then she has no problem showing Mustafa's defense attorney his certification. But instead, she's terrified to have anybody have access to the internal affairs file. What we're going to do in this podcast, we're going to read the transcript. We're going to see what the prosecutor is saying in court. We're going to look at what the defense attorney is saying in court. And we're going to ask the question, why is there so much pushback? Why are they terrified for Mustafa's defense attorney to look at the internal affairs files?
If any of that is posted anywhere on the internet, we're going to have problems. Whatever copies have been made of that, those need to be destroyed.
Okay.
Okay? If they get disclosed, that is going to put me in a situation where I will have to withdraw from the case.
Okay.
If you disclose that information in any way, all of it needs to be destroyed now. But if you disclose it in any way, it's going to put me in a position where I will have to withdraw from the case. If you all choose to go on the internet and try to publicize this stuff, that's going to create real problems.
Okay.
You can't do it, is what I'm telling you. You cannot do it. I will have to move to withdraw from the case.
Okay. All right.
Okay?
All right.
So make sure everybody's aware of that. Okay? If any of that is posted anywhere on the internet, we're going to have problems. Whatever copies have been made of that, those need to be destroyed.
Okay.
Okay? If they get disclosed, that is going to put me in a situation where I will have to withdraw from the case.
Okay.
If you
This is not another bar on podcast. Mustafa through the police body cam. Defense attorney Brad Haywood, you are under the microscope. Now, in this podcast, what we're going to do, we're going to go through the Brady Motion, and we're going to ask the question, why is the main investigator not being used to take the stand? Prosecutor Sarah Sammy there's a motion that's coming up, and it's a motion of in Lemonade to admit the EDR data, the computer inside Mustafa's vehicle and the computer that's inside the other vehicle. They're going to admit, the prosecutor wants to admit that on the record. Now, she wants to bring in the assistant investigator, not the main investigator. And the question is, why? So we're gonna look into why she's not using the main investigator, Robert Drum, and instead using assistant investigator Chad Mason. Now, we're also going to ask the question, why is the prosecutor terrified for the defense to look at the internal affairs files? To answer these questions, I think the first thing we want to do is go into the transcript. What are they saying in court? What is the defense attorney telling the presiding judge, Judge Carol Weimer? Why is he asking for the internal affairs files? Why is the prosecutor having so much pushback? I mean, it should be something simple. You have investigators on this case, and the defense wants to look into, are they certified to be on this case? Have they gotten in trouble for anything they've done in this case? I mean, when you look at the Mustafa Al-Jazari case, you're talking about a situation where the Commonwealth attorney sealed off the whole entire case. You can no longer put in a FOIA. You can't look at the body cams. You can't look at the documents in this case. You can't even look at the dash camera inside the vehicle, Mustafa's vehicle. Well, since there is a seal, there has been a leak into this case. Body cams and documents are all over the internet from a sealed case. I've managed to enter and hack the server for the police department and release the body cams and the document and the dash camera that they've been hiding for over 2.5 years. And what we're finding out is that this police department falsified Mustafa's statements, crushed and staged Mustafa's vehicle, cut and muted the dash camera in Mustafa's vehicle. The police department weaponized children that are 9, 10, 14, and 16 in the Mustafa Al-Jazari case. They falsified a whole entire case. Details show that Mustafa did everything he can to avoid a vehicle accident, that his foot was on the brake the whole entire time. He did everything he can to avoid a vehicle accident. And the police department lied about the whole thing. And now we're at a point that defense attorney Brad Haywood filed a Brady motion, and he's telling presiding judge, Judge Carol Weimer, about what the police officers did in this case. And he wants to know, he wants to have access into the internal affairs files. Judge Carol Weimer granted him access. Now, the problem here is that defense attorney Brad Haywood went behind closed doors and told the prosecutor Sarah Sammy, prosecutor Stephanie Buck, you don't have to give me the internal affairs files. I'm no longer going to pursue what's on these files. And the question is why? And the question that we're asking is this defense attorney, Brad Haywood, protecting those police officers that falsified this case? I mean, we have the defense attorney on a recorded line admit to him being threatened off of this case. So the question is, has he been threatened not to pursue these officers? And is that why he went behind closed doors with the prosecutor and agreed not to pursue the internal affairs files? Well, let's look at the document so that you're not sitting here taking my word for it. Let's look at the document that Brad Haywood filed in court. This is a document after the Brady motion. Brad Haywood, this is an order that was agreed on between the defense attorney Brad Haywood and prosecutor Sarah Sammy and prosecutor Stephanie Buck. So the judge granted him the internal affairs files, and then he goes behind closed doors. If you go to page 2 and you zoom in on request 14. Request 14 says, defense request record or information revealing criminal or professional misconduct, internal disciplines. So professional misconduct in Mustafa Al-Jazari case, internal disciplines. What did they get in trouble for? Have they gotten in trouble for anything in this case or previous cases? Because that goes into the credibility of these officers that are testifying in the Mustafa Al-Jazari case, or credibility related issues concerning officers or witnesses. So, court ruling, the defense withdraws its request as to internal affairs files. So Brad Haywood withdraw. He's no longer pursuing the internal affairs file. And the question is why? So this document says defense withdraw its request as to internal affairs files. At this time, the Commonwealth agreed to allow defense counsel to review CW a summary of internal affairs files. She's going to allow him to review a summary. The prosecutor that's been lying about this case for over 2.5 years. The prosecutor, that defense attorney Brad Haywood in court stood up and told Judge Carol Weimer, Your Honor, this prosecutor is hiding exculpatory evidence. This prosecutor is using officer that falsified Mustafa's statement. You're talking about a prosecutor that you told the judge, Judge Carol Weimer, is using officers that weaponized children that are 9, 10, 14, and 16. That's child abuse. They weaponize children against Mustafa. You're talking about that prosecutor that you're going to allow her to give you a summary. So she's going to go in and she's going to give you you're going to trust that prosecutor. How does that make any sense? You're going to trust a prosecutor that's been lying for 2.5 years? That makes absolutely no sense. So you're not going to go in yourself, but you're going to tell that prosecutor to give you a summary. All right, so let's continue reading. Defense withdraw its request as to internal affairs files. At this time, the Commonwealth agrees to allow defense counsel to review the CWA summary of internal affairs files or schedule time for review. A protective order is entered regarding this material. Defense may refile if it later identified deficiencies. The Commonwealth agrees to disclose all witness criminal history to defense counsel. Okay, so he's not going in. He's going to withdraw his request to go in himself and look at the internal affairs files. And instead, the prosecutor is going to give him a summary. You're going to trust that prosecutor. All right. I mean, why is this important? I mean, you've got a situation where the defense attorney is giving an item that can look into the credibility of these officers, can see if they're certified, and he's going behind closed doors telling the prosecutor, don't worry about it. All right. When you find out what is going on in the Mustafa Al-Jazari case, you're going to understand how relevant and disturbing this is. The main investigator, Robert Drum, is already all over the news that he falsified Mustafa's statements. The foundation of this case, the main investigator falsified it on the police report. That's all over the news. Let's watch what NBC4 is telling us. And the question is that we asked earlier, why is Prosecutor Sarah Sammy not using the main investigator, Robert Drum, to testify about the EDR data inside the vehicle? And then you find out that this investigator had falsified Mustafa's statement. So that's the first investigator. Let's look at what the news is telling us about Robert Drum.
For tonight, there are new questions being raised in the case of a man charged with murder for a crash that killed his girlfriend and her 5-year-old daughter last year.
They come after Prince William's police chief ruled the investigating officer had violated department policy. Northern Virginia Bureau Chief Julie Carey spoke to the driver's defense attorney about why he thinks the finding casts doubt on the case.
Mustafa Al-Jazari has been behind bars for almost a year now, accused of intentionally driving his car into oncoming traffic, a crash that killed Dorothy Fontaine and her 5-year-old daughter, Empress. Initially charged with manslaughter, the charges were later upgraded to second-degree murder. Al-Jazari's family insists the crash was an accident. The defendant's brothers filed an internal affairs complaint with the Prince William County Police, alleging the investigating officer, quote, falsified a portion of his police report to say that the couple was arguing before the crash. Al-Jazari's brother provided a taped version of a phone conversation that contradicted portions of the written police report. Last month, the Al-Jazari family received this brief letter from Prince William Police Chief Peter Newsham reading, "The investigation revealed that Master Police Officer Drum violated department policy, therefore appropriate corrective action has been taken." Al-Jazari hired a new defense attorney, Blake Weiner, who tells me he specializes.
What this investigator have done is he falsified the foundation of the whole entire case. He put in his police report, Robert Drum put in the police report, that Mustafa told him that he was arguing with his girlfriend inside the vehicle. Mustafa never said that. But this investigator put that in the police report. Unfortunately for this investigator, we have a recording of that phone call conversation that Mustafa never said that. We took that recording to Internal Affairs, and Internal Affairs sent us a letter that they investigated, and they found out that this investigator violated department policy. Well, our complaint is very specific, so when you're sending us a letter, we have proof that this investigator falsified Mustafa's statement. And now that the police department is sending us a letter telling us that, yes, we investigated and we found this investigator to have violated department policy. And now the defense attorney is given a chance to go into and look at what did Internal Affairs do when they investigated that he has falsified the police report. And Brad Haywood says, you don't have to give me the internal affairs files. The prosecutor in court is terrified. She's pushing back on it. The judge finally gave the defense attorney access to the internal affairs files. And now Brad Haywood tells the prosecutor, don't worry about giving me the internal affairs files. Well, when you go in and look at what this investigator did, you're going to find out why the prosecutor can't put Robert Drum on the stand, because his credibility is shot. He can no longer stand in front of the jury and say whatever he wants to say about this case, because he already falsified the foundation of this case, and the jury is going to look at that. So what does Prosecutor Sarah Sammy and Prosecutor Stephanie Buck do? They say, all right, we're not going to use this investigator. We're going to use the assistant investigator on this case, Chad Mason. Let's continue watching what NBC4 says about Robert Drum, and we're going to take a deep dive into how investigator Chad Mason is a bigger problem for the prosecution, and that's why she's terrified not to have anybody look at the internal affair files.
Is in police misconduct cases.
The police report talks about my client saying, I know what happened. He didn't say that. The police report also says that they were arguing in the car. He didn't say that. These are not only these material facts and material misrepresentations, they're the foundation of the government's case.
Okay. All right. So the first investigator falsified Mustafa's statements. Now that we know, and let's see if we can take a look at who Robert Drum is. We have a picture of Robert Drum. Let's see if we can pull him up. Let's see. So that way we know who we're talking about. Let's see. Robert Drum. Let's see. I know I have a picture here somewhere. Nope, not that. That's Brad Haywood. All right, let's see. There we go. All right. So, this is Robert Drum. This is the first investigator on the case. This is the investigator that's all over the news, who the prosecutor can no longer use him to testify in front of the jury. She's terrified to have anybody look into his internal affair files. She's terrified, and she can no longer put him on the stand, because the minute you put him on the stand, the defense is going to tell the jury, this is the officer that falsified Mustafa's statements. The foundation of the whole entire case. This is the officer that's all over NBC4. All right. So now that we're done with Robert Drum, let's look at the assistant investigator. Let's see if we have a picture of him here. There we go. Officer Chad Mason, assistant investigator on the Mustafa Al-Jazari case. Now, there's a motion that's coming up, and Prosecutor Sarah Sammy is going to use this officer to take the stand and testify to the EDR data. Now, this officer in a bond motion took the stand, and Prosecutor Sarah Sammy told presiding judge, Judge Carol Weimer, in a bond motion, that this officer is an expert on EDR data. So she had him take the stand and identify him and have him testify under that he's an expert, that he's licensed to testify on EDR data. The question is, why is she terrified that anybody is going to look at his internal affair files? In court, she's terrified. There's pushback. She tells the presiding judge, Your Honor, we will not be given the internal affairs files. The judge is looking at the prosecutor, and he knows by law, when you have a falsified case, when you have, forget falsified, when you have a case that has bias, defense attorney Brad Haywood told the presiding judge there's so much bias in this whole entire investigation. And according to a case out of the Supreme Court, Brady versus Maryland, I'm entitled to the internal affairs files. So the judge gave him access to the internal affairs files. So he turns around and he says, I don't need it anymore. I'm no longer going to pursue the internal affair. Why are they so terrified? I mean, if you're an expert, you're either an expert or you're not an expert. And if you are an expert, the prosecutor should have no problem showing you the internal affairs files. But then when you find out that investigator Chad Mason testified in a motion to dismiss that he's not an expert, which one is it? Are you an expert or are you not an expert? Because in a bond motion, you're testifying that you're an expert. In a motion to dismiss, you're testifying you are not an expert. That's a huge problem. For the investigator to lie and for the prosecutor to lie. And now we're at a point that we can get to the bottom of it. Are you certified? Did you lie? Did you take the stand in a bond motion and lie about the EDR data? Absolutely. We have information. We have the data. And we know that you lied about the data inside the computer, inside Mustafa's vehicle. The ACM, the EDR data. Now, the question here is, are you certified? Because in a motion to dismiss, you are telling us that you are not certified. Let's read the motion to dismiss and what Chad Mason told the presiding judge. In his own words, he told the judge that he's not certified. So let's hear from Chad Mason himself. I think that's a good way of doing it. This is the transcript for October 31st, 2024. This is a transcript for the motion to dismiss. This is where Chad Mason, investigator Chad Mason. All right, so the presiding, and the questions that we're asking is what's on the screen. Investigator Chad Mason testified to not being an expert in a motion to dismiss. How is the prosecutor using him as an expert to testify on EDR data? As a matter of fact, how is the prosecutor already used him as an expert in a bond motion? Before we read the transcript, let's go to what Chad Mason is telling us all over the news, because Chad Mason made it on the news during a bond motion. This is Chad Mason.
Prosecutors also called the crash scene investigator to testify to support their theory that the crash was intentional. Sergeant Chad Mason says there were no skid marks at the scene, only light braking, and that the heavy damage was all on the passenger side. Al Jazeera's attorney says that evidence actually supports his case.
I believe the testimony of the witness supports directly our theory, which is that he was trying to maintain control, which is what you would want to try to do if you are in a desperate, dangerous situation with your vehicle.
Prosecutors also...
You know, I found it really interesting that you have an investigator that's taken the stand, and now we're finding out that he's not certified. And the prosecutor is terrified that anybody's going to look into his internal affairs files. You have a defense attorney...
Maintain control.
...that's on the news who went through a bond motion without reconstructing the vehicle, without reconstructing the scene. You find that, I mean, this is 2.5 years into the Mustafa Al-Jazari case. You found out that the prosecutor has blocked the reconstruction of Mustafa's vehicle. You blocked the reconstruction of Mustafa's vehicle? And you, the defense attorney, this is Mustafa's previous defense attorney before Brad Haywood, went into... This is Blake Weiner, went into a bond motion without reconstructing the accident. How does that make any sense? So you have an investigator that's not certified. You have a defense attorney that knows that the prosecutor blocked his reconstruction Let's look at the body cam that's been leaking all over the internet. This is a body cam where there is a judge order. There's a judge order to reconstruct the vehicle. There's a judge order to reconstruct the vehicle, to bring in an independent expert. There's a judge order to go in and have an independent expert to reconstruct the vehicle. And the prosecutor, the main investigator, tells the independent expert, the prosecutor, specifically Prosecutor Sarah Sammy, said, you cannot reconstruct the vehicle. We have the body cam. Let's watch that body cam.
Which one is it?
What's that?
Which one is
It's in a box. Per my conversation with Sarah, said this is the first time I've ever done this in 18 years. She said we can pull it out for you.
Yeah.
You can look at it. She doesn't want anybody touching it.
Okay. Like touching it, I mean, can I?
Like if you want to take pictures and all that, but if anything needs to be manipulated, we'll do it for you for chain of custody issues.
Perfect. Sure. Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. So 2.5 years ago, 2.5 years ago, this independent expert is blocked from reconstructing the vehicle. And he tells him, you can't touch the vehicle. How is he going to reconstruct the vehicle if he can't touch the vehicle? He's blocked from reconstructing the vehicle. And he said, the prosecutor said, you can't touch the vehicle. Prosecutor Sarah Sammy. Now, we go back to what they're saying here. On the news, you have an investigator that's taken the stand to testify, an investigator that's not certified to take the stand and testify about the EDR. He's not licensed. He tells you he's not licensed. You have a defense attorney that went through a bond motion and
Directly our theory.
And after the bond motion, he was ready to go to trial without reconstructing the whole entire accident. I mean, let's listen to this one more time.
Prosecutors also called the crash scene investigator to testify to support their theory that the crash was intentional. Sergeant Chad Mason says there were no skid marks at the scene, only light braking, and that the heavy damage was all on the passenger side. Al Jazeera's attorney says that evidence actually supports his case.
I believe the testimony of the witness supports directly our theory, which is that he was trying to maintain control, which is what you would want to try to do if you are in a desperate, dangerous situation with your vehicle.
Prosecutors also called the crash scene investigator to testify to support the...
Okay. All right. So he goes into a bond without a crash reconstructionist, without reconstructing the vehicle. The crash reconstruction is being blocked by the prosecutor, an investigator that's not certified. And the question that we're asking here, why is the prosecutor blocking the reconstruction? I mean, wouldn't you think? I mean, here's what's going on in this case. The prosecution says that Mustafa drove into oncoming traffic on purpose. Well, the details that are coming out of this case show that Mustafa did everything he can to avoid a vehicle accident. Now, Mustafa's defense hires an independent expert to go in and reconstruct this whole entire scene. Wouldn't it make sense? Wouldn't it be in the best interest of the prosecutor to have an independent expert go in and reconstruct this whole scene? Wouldn't that prove the prosecution case? But instead, the prosecutor is terrified that you're going to reconstruct this vehicle scene. The guy that's in solitary confinement is telling you, where's my reconstruction? And the prosecutor is blocking it. When you find out that the police department actually crushed and staged the vehicle, what they've done is the vehicle looks one way after the accident. Inside the police department, the vehicle looks completely crushed. They crushed and staged it. And what they've done is they removed the original Leica scan. There's a $500,000 equipment that the county gives these officers. When there's an accident, they can scan the vehicle, they can scan the other vehicle, they can scan the roads, and it tells you exactly how the accident happened. What they've done is they removed the original scan, crushed the vehicle, and then when we brought in our independent expert, they told him, you can't touch the vehicle, you can just take pictures of it. The prosecution is terrified because if you have a complete report, one, you're going to find out that they crushed and staged the vehicle. Two, you're going to find out what they've been hiding for 2.5 years. The police department, in a leaked body cam, found out that there's brake failure. They inspected Mustafa's vehicle, and they found out that Mustafa's foot is on the brake the whole entire time, but there's brake failure. Let's watch a body cam when the police are inspecting Mustafa's vehicle.
Their theory that the crash was
right rear tire brake didn't engage. Right rear tire.
The police department inspected Mustafa's vehicle, and they found out that the front brake passenger caliper doesn't work. The back caliper passenger doesn't work. So even though Mustafa's foot is on the brake the whole entire time, the vehicle would not stop. And now the prosecutor is so terrified that she blocks the reconstruction 2.5 years ago and is using an assistant investigator who in the transcript in a motion to dismiss is telling us, I'm not an expert. Let's go into the motion to dismiss. And listen to what Chad Mason is telling us. And then we're going to go back into what is going on in this case. I mean, if the main if the investigator that's taking the stand is telling you, I am not an expert, but then the prosecutor have already lied and used him as an expert and is blocking the internal affairs file so that she can use him again as an expert, that's a huge problem. One, this investigator is lying about the data. Two, he's not certified. Let's read what they're saying in courts. Let's read what Chad Mason is telling us in courts. This is the transcript from October 31st, the motion to dismiss. This is investigator Chad Mason. Judge Carol Weimer he says, let me stop you just for a minute. If this winds up in some other court, please state your full name and your involvement in this case. Chad Mason says, yes, sir. Sergeant Chad Mason, Prince William County Police Department. I was assistant investigator on this case. Assistant investigator on this case. We already found out what happened to the first investigator. We already know why the prosecutor is not using the main investigator. Is using an assistant investigator on the Mustafa Al-Jazari case. All right. So we move on to page 21 from the October 31st, 2024 motion to dismiss. All right. So the defense attorney at the time is Blake Weiner. He's asking Chad Mason, I'm just asking a specific question. Is it your testimony that then the power is off, the dash camera? It is impossible for information to be processing in an SD card. Chad Mason says, to my knowledge. Question mark. To my knowledge. All right. Defense attorney Blake Weiner says, to your knowledge, what information, the basis of your knowledge? He's asking him a question. All right. Chad Mason says, common use of electronic. Common use of electronic. Defense attorney Blake Weiner asked Chad Mason, so you don't have any expertise No, not in terms of SD card. Defense attorney says, correct. Chad Mason replies, not beyond the knowledge of a common person. Listen to what he's telling defense attorney Blake Weiner in the motion to dismiss. Not beyond the knowledge of a common person. So, if you don't have knowledge beyond a common person, and here the context of what he's asking him, this is a motion to dismiss, and Chad Mason is testifying to that he took Mustafa's dash camera off the windshield, back to his vehicle, took the SD card, plugged it into his computer, downloaded the dash camera, then took the SD card, put it back into the dash camera, put it back onto Mustafa's dash camera. He sat on those files for 2 days. 2 days later is when he got a warrant for the dash camera. He testified that he violated the chain of custody. The chain of custody is supposed to be that he gets a warrant for this dash camera, takes the dash camera to digital forensic, Kathy Zymuth, and Cassie Zymuth with digital forensic with Prince William County Police Department is supposed to download the files, copy and mirror the files to protect the integrity of those files, and then upload them to evidence.com, the police department server. That didn't happen. The chain of custody has been broken. Chad Mason took those files, downloaded the file, took the dash camera, downloaded the files, sat on them for 2 days. Got a warrant for the dash camera 2 days later. Who uploaded these files to the police department server, evidence.com? Chad Mason says he did. So wait a minute. The problem here is, one, you violated the chain of custody, and the problem here for you violating the chain of custody and sitting down on those files for 2 days without a warrant is that today we have a dash camera that has no audio and is cut before impact. The collision is not there. And there are 17 frames missing from inside the vehicle. That's a huge problem. Because anybody that's listening to what we're talking about will tell you that Chad Mason cut and muted this dash camera. Why do we say that? Because digital forensic admit that this dash camera does have audio. For 2.5 years, they've been running with the narrative that this dash camera doesn't have audio. It's cut before impact. But then in the filing, and then at one point, Cassie Zymuth testifies to that she heard the audio. And here, he's being asked about how Chad Mason handled the dash camera, and he tells him, I'm not an expert with digital devices. So, you're not an expert here, but you're an expert to testify on EDR data? How does that make any sense? Here, you're not an expert. But in a bond motion, you're an expert. In a motion that's coming up, the prosecutor wants to put you as an expert to testify on EDR data. Are you an expert? It's either you're not an expert or you are an expert. Here, you're telling us you are not an expert. Let's read that one more time. Is it your testimony that when the power is off, the dash camera, is it impossible for information to be processing in an SD card? To my knowledge, the defense attorney, Blake Weiner, asked Chad Mason, to your knowledge, what information, the basis of your knowledge? Chad Mason says, common use of electronics. The defense attorney would ask him, so you don't have any expertise? Chad Mason says, not in terms of SD cards, not beyond the knowledge of a common person. not beyond the knowledge of a common person. You're not an expert. You're telling us you're not an expert. Okay? All right. So now that we have this piece of information, let's go back to what NBC4 is telling us. He's all over NBC4 testifying to EDR data. Let's go back to what the news is telling us.
Prosecutors also called the crash scene investigator to testify to support their theory that the crash was intentional. Sergeant Chad Mason says there were no skid marks at the scene, only light braking, and that the heavy damage was all on the passenger side. Al Jazeera's attorney says that evidence actually supports his case.
I believe the testimony of the witness supports directly our theory, which is that he was trying to maintain control, which is what you would want to try to do if you are in a desperate, dangerous situation with your vehicle.
Prosecutors.
So you have a situation where the investigator is telling you, I'm not an expert, in a motion to dismiss, but here he is in a bond motion testifying as an expert. And the prosecutor is terrified. The prosecutor is terrified that the defense is going to look at the internal affairs files. Let's read the transcript of what they're saying in court. What's the back and forth between the prosecutor, Sarah Sammy, and defense attorney Brad Haywood. Remember, earlier in this podcast, we read an order where Brad Haywood went behind closed doors and told prosecutor Sarah Sammy and prosecutor Stephanie Buck, you don't have to give me the internal affairs files that Judge Carol Weimer granted me to have access to. So they're making backdoor deals to protect this officer to continue to lie about Mustafa. Let's read what they're saying in court. This is October 3rd, 2025. This is during a Brady motion. So if you go on page 26. All right. All right, so number 14, Judge Carol Weimer. Number 14, and all records and information revealing criminal conduct, professional misconduct, or internal disciplines of witness and any other individuals involving in the investigation of this case. The Commonwealth objects insofar as you're seeking personal files, internal affairs files, or other confidential information, not material to guilt or punishment, not within the Commonwealth possession. Now, that doesn't address whether or not it is material with regard to the basis of reputation of the witnesses. All right, so that's what Judge Carol Weimer is telling the prosecutor. All right, that the defense is asking for internal affairs files. Sarah Sammy says, and he says, you, prosecutor Sarah Sammy, is objecting. All right, so let's hear from what prosecutor Sarah Sammy is telling us. I'm sorry, what was the court question? All right, so the prosecutor is confused. She doesn't know what Judge Weimer is asking her. I mean, one common theme between when you're going through this transcript and what you're seeing in court, you have a diversity hire prosecutor that's so incompetent that half the time she doesn't even know what's going on in court. Let's continue reading. All right, so Sarah Sammy says, I'm sorry, what was the court question? Judge Weimer says, well, that doesn't address the issue of whether or not you think it's material if it goes to the reputation for truth and veracity of the witness. All right, Sarah Sammy says, Your Honor, and I agree with that. Your Honor, and I agree with that. Our response to this is to indicate the Commonwealth does not want to make this circus where they get a carte blanche ability to review all of the officers' files who are involved in this case. That's what the Commonwealth does not want. And that is exactly why we respond the way we did. I personally went to review those files myself to be able to respond in that way. Yeah, lady, we're going to trust you, a prosecutor that's been lying about the case for 2.5 years, to go and personally review it yourself. No, thank you. A prosecutor that's been lying for 2.5 years, she wants us to trust her with her reviewing whether this officer is certified or not. Whether we know what he got in trouble in the Mustafa Al-Jazari for. I mean, if this isn't a joke, I don't know what a joke is. We just want to prevent every officer file being dug through, whether it's relevant or not relevant, including their training history. Oh, that's interesting. You don't want their training history to be looked into? Oh, you don't want to know if Chad Mason is certified or not. Is he trained enough? Does he have any training in EDR data? Interesting. Training history, their certification, and anything of that sort. That's interesting. So your logic is you're charging someone with murder and evidence that show there's a bias all over the case. They've lied all over the case. And the main investigator you're no longer using because he lied. The second investigator, he's telling you I'm not an expert. And you want to tell me I don't want to make this into a circus and have the defense attorney dig through everything that he's done. Lady, we want to know two things. Is he certified? And two, what did he get in trouble for? I think that's fair. But you, the prosecutor, is terrified. Because you know your expert, Chad Mason, is not certified. As a matter of fact, when we look at the internal affairs files, we're going to find out what he got in trouble for in the Mustafa Al-Jazari case, that when you put him on the stand, his credibility is going to be shot. All right. Judge Carol Weimer tells Prosecutor Sarah Sammy, well, we haven't gotten to that one yet. That's a separate request. So you don't object if it has any bearing or any indication of the reputation for the officer being untruthful, do you? Absolutely not, Your Honor. Sarah Sammy says, no. Not because we're going to find out if he's credible or not, if he's honest or not, if he got in trouble for anything. That's not what I'm scared from. Not because, lady, then why are you not having the main investigator testify? If you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem releasing the internal affairs file to the defense. But clearly, you have a lot to hide. All right. Judge Weimer says, okay, so what else do you want? Brad Haywood, the defense attorney, says, well, this was the one that I was going to say in the third paragraph below. Commonwealth's response, say on September 30, the Commonwealth has a chance to review internal affairs files. And then there's some that are available for me to look at their office. I don't know what's in there. Perhaps that will be satisfactory to me. So in this one, I think I would prefer to respond if there are any deficiencies as I see it at a later time once I've had a chance to review what's been disclosed. So they're in court. They're telling him that we're not going to give you the internal affairs files, but you can come in. You can come in and review them at the police department. You yourself have to physically come in to internal affairs and go through those files. Now, what defense attorney Brad Haywood did later is he told the prosecutor, I'm not going in. You don't have to give me anything. Just give me your summary. The summary of a prosecutor that's been lying for 2.5 years, that you said that's been lying. You told Judge Carol Weimer this prosecutor is using officers that falsified Mustafa's statement. All of a sudden, you turn around, you tell her, I trust your summary to find out if these officers are certified or not. That doesn't make any sense. Let's continue reading. All right, so Miss Sammy, Prosecutor Sarah Sammy says, Your Honor, I would ask the court to enter the proposed protective order that we handed to the court. There's sensitive material that Judge Weimer says, do you have any objection to the protective order? Defense attorney Brad Haywood says, does at least defense counsel get a hard copy? He's asking, I mean, have you seen that scene from Oliver Twist when he's at a orphanage and he's asking for, can I have some more? I mean, at this point, this defense attorney is begging his way through it. Let's take a break and look at what I'm talking about. Let's see if I can pull it up. Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist. Can I have some more? Can I at least get a hard copy? I mean, this is really funny. This is defense attorney Brad Haywood.
Yes, Oliver Twist, if you ask me. I would have done things rather differently, I can tell you that. Please, sir, I want some more.
What?
Please, sir, I want some more.
More?
All right, stop it. Stop it right there. Let go.
This is funny. I mean, when you read the transcript, it sure sounds like a scene from Oliver Twist. Okay, let's read that one more time. That now that we have Oliver Twist in context. Okay, so defense attorney Brad Haywood says, does at least defense counsel get a hard copy or not? Sarah Sammy says, no, we don't get hard copies either. Mr. Haywood says, okay. Sarah Sammy says, they're available for review. I've typed a summary that you can review. And then if you want to see actual files, I believe the police department is willing to accommodate that. Haywood says, okay. Defense attorney Brad Haywood continues and says, we can take it from there. I'm going to be back here on Monday. The problem with things that are simply in the Commonwealth's custody and I have to review here is that I have a drive 45 minutes to an hour to get here. So it's not as easy as if I were at the public defense office. All right. Judge Weimer says, I think there's sufficient time between now and the trial for you to be able to do that. And if you discover things in the file that you want to get copies of, and I'm not saying I'm going to order that this point, Mr. Haywood says, yes, I understand. So he's telling him, Prosecutor Sarah Sammy, we're not going to give you a hard copy. He's like, can I at least get a hard copy? She's like, no, we're not even going to give you a hard copy. I'm going to give you my summary. Okay? I'm the prosecutor that's been lying about this case for 2.5 years. You're going to trust my summary. And if you want, you can go to the police department and review it yourself. And Judge Weimer says, if you find anything that you want a hard copy for, then we can have another motion. And I'm not promising, but I'll see if I can grant you the hard copies that you're gonna find out that this investigator, Chad Mason, the assistant investigator, is not certified. Then I can give you a hard copy. Not gonna give you a hard copy now, even if you find it. The main investigator lied about this case, falsified your client's statement. You're not gonna get any hard copies of what they found out. What else did they find out? You're not going to get any hard copies. You can go in, look at it. And then finally, we looked at the order where he agreed to not even going in. He says, forget it. You don't have to give me anything. I'm going to help you protect me. The defense attorney, Brad Haywood, is going to help you, Prosecutor Sarah Sammy, Prosecutor Stephanie Buck, protect your investigator so we can continue to lie about the Mustafa Al-Jazari case. All right. So going back to, let's see. All right. So, all right. Judge Weimer says, but you have to put, Judge Weimer says, if you find out there's anything in there, then you have to put in another motion. So Judge Weimer said, but I would expect you to put on a motion. Defense attorney Haywood says, that's fine. Judge Weimer says, for that, Haywood says, understood. Judge Weimer says, and I will leave that part of that open. All right. Defense attorney Brad Haywood says, okay, that's fine. The court says, all right. And they end the matter for the internal affairs. So up to that point, Brad Haywood is going to get a summary from the prosecutor and is allowed to go in and look at the internal affairs file. Let's go back to the order. And in the order, what did Brad Haywood agree on behind closed doors, behind his client? He went behind his client, Mustafa Al-Jazari, sat down with the prosecutor and told the prosecutor, you don't have to give me the internal affairs file. Let's look at the order and what they agreed on behind closed doors. This is the order. Order on defense motion for Brady material. Okay. This is on October 3rd, 2025. If you go to page 2, request 14, defense request record or information revealing criminal or professional misconduct, internal discipline, or credibility related issues concerning officer or witnesses. Court ruling, defense withdraw its request as to internal affairs files. Why? Why would you withdraw your access to internal affairs files? And instead, you're going to rely on a summary from a prosecutor that you, defense attorney Brad Haywood, told presiding judge that's been lying and using officers that's been lying about this case for 2.5 years. There's a motion that's coming up where prosecutor Sarah Sammy and prosecutor Stephanie Buck is going to admit the EDR, bring in Chad Mason, put him on the stand. We're going to go through that motion. We have that motion. We're going to go through it on the next podcast. We're going to go and take a deep dive into that motion. Now that we are finding out details that are disturbing. And I want to hear from you directly. What do you think about a prosecutor that is no longer using the main investigator? Leave that in the comment. I want to hear from you directly. What does it mean when a prosecutor is using an assistant investigator, but you find out that this assistant investigator is not certified? In his own word, he told us that he is not certified. What does it mean when a prosecutor is using an investigator that's telling you, I'm not certified, but she has him on the stand? She's already used him in a bond motion, and she's going to be using him in a coming motion to admit EDR. An investigator that's not certified, that he tells you, I'm not certified. What are they doing in the Mustafa Al-Jazari case? For 2.5 years, you're telling me that you are terrified to show us internal affairs files? What are we going to find out in these internal affairs files? I mean, from what we're finding, it looks like we're going to find out that you're using an investigator that's not certified. I want to thank everybody for being here. This is not another boring podcast. Mustafa through the police body cams. Defense attorney Brad Haywood, you are under the microscope.
If any of that is posted anywhere on the internet, we're going to have problems. Whatever copies have been made of that, those need to be destroyed.
Okay.
Okay? If they get disclosed, that is going to put me in a situation where I will have to withdraw from the case.
Okay.
If you disclose that information in any way, all of it needs to be destroyed now. But if you disclose it in any way, it's going to put me in a position where I will have to withdraw from the case. If you all choose to go on the internet and try to publicize this stuff, that's going to create real problems.
Okay.
You can't do it, is what I'm telling you. You cannot do it. I will have to move to withdraw from the case.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
So make sure everybody's aware of that. Okay. If any of that is posted anywhere on the internet, we're going to have problems. Whatever
Okay.
Okay? If they get disclosed, that is going to put me in a situation where I will have to withdraw from the case.
Okay.
If you